Or were the guardians of the world karma from Shambhala and Agartha, the leaders of both sides, the Illuminati and the Nazis, initiators of the karma of Atlantis? In any case, there was one mystery. After the final battle in Berlin, hundreds of Tibetan corpses were found very close to the Nazi headquarters. And there is another mystery. The flying saucer technology which points to an extraterrestrial high civilization. Should the Spear of Destiny, which is a symbol for the spiritual leadership role for mankind, be given to the German nation? Why did secret fleets of submarines retreat towards the South Pole and Argentina? They also carried Adolf Hitler, Eva Braun, and other secret members of the Thule Circle.
And with the cessation of hostilities, of course, in Europe, Germany has capitulated, and of course there was an immediate interest and concern to get there as quickly as possible to capture the personnel, the documents, and also the instruments called the spacecraft which Hitler had created. Now that was of primary interest to the Soviets, the Americans, and of course the English. As it turns out, the Soviets were the first to reach Berlin, and they did get most of the documents supportive, of course, of that particular project. Secondly, the Americans arrived, and they got the second amount of documents, but they did get the most of the brains, including von Braun. And Dr. Hertak will pick that up later, of course, and expand upon that. Now, we also discovered when we got to Berlin that the two craft which we were most interested in, the spacecraft which Hitler had, of course, built, were no longer there. Indeed, they had been disassembled by the SS, and they had been spirited out of the country aboard 2 submarines, and they spent 6 months at sea and finally ended up in what is now, or always has been, Argentina. From there, they were taken into Antarctica, and that's another story, so I won't go into it. Another interesting thing, too, which I'd like to bring out here, when I had my lecture in Frankfurt 2 or 3 years ago, I flew directly from Frankfurt back to Chicago, Illinois for another major appearance, and in my audience was a woman who was very excited about what I was talking about, because I was talking about this very subject. But I was also talking about Hitler, and I also said that I didn't think he died in the bunker. She couldn't wait to talk to me, and later on we had a private interview, and she told me that she was the daughter of the former secret head of Argentina. And I won't mention her name on TV, but nevertheless, I know that it was all substantiated. She said that when she was a little girl, about 10 or 12 years old, she and her father, who was the head of the Secret Service of Argentina, were dining in an outdoor cafe, and he said, you see that man sitting over there? And she said, yes. And he said, well, that's Hitler. You see the woman sitting next to him? That's Eva Braun, his wife. Hitler did not die in the bunker. So we have to assume then, as the spacecraft were being taken to Argentina, Hitler also went along with that and later set up his life in Argentina. Now, he died somewhere in the 80s after 1987 and fulfilled a prophecy as the great Lord of Darkness, of course, in accordance with the Mayan calendar.
All witnesses were eliminated by Sebottendorf, of whom not even a photograph exists. Allegedly, he was assassinated in Turkey. Haushofer and his family allegedly committed suicide. All souls who were involved with one or the other party were drawn into the game of the seducers and the seduced. A game of power and powerlessness, culprits and victims. Thus, human beings are on the inside what they fight against on the outside, because they have suppressed it, or because it was their karma to take part in this game of oppressors and victims.
There is another theory on Sebottendorf, which is held by the French author René Arlot, who in his 60s has written a book and had been intensely interested in Sebottendorf. In that book, he declares that Sebottendorf acted secretly on behalf of the Order's chiefs. These Order chiefs were from the Turkish Lodge, which Sebottendorf had joined on his first stay in Turkey. So from this theory derives the idea that Sebottendorf was possibly in charge of bringing the national movement in Germany under the control of the Freemasons. One has to add that the Freemasonry which Sebottendorf was talking about was the Eastern Freemasonry. He also called them the Rosicrucians, the alchemists. It is different from the Western Freemasonry, which he had rejected. Following this theory, little by little, Sebottendorf published secrets, in particular in his book, The Practice of the Old Turkish Freemasonry, which was published in 1924. In this book, there are meditation practices aimed at self-discipline, which he brought back from Turkey. The theory finally developed through this book, and it was also applied to the time Sebottendorf spent in Munich. Even there, he is supposed to have been working under the secret order chiefs.
Not much has changed today. All who are striving for power are manipulated through their need for loans from the financial lodges. They need money to finance their personal power thirst, their armies and wars. The Third Great War was already predicted in the scripts of the wise men of Zion. This one too is supposed to take place in Germany and Europe. It will be interesting to see who will be used as a tool this time. Will it be a Russian or Muslim dictator who wants to release the world once again from the Illuminati? Already one can find an extensive range of books and countless scripts, especially in Muslim countries like Iraq and Iran, telling us how the imperialistic and Zionistic Freemason Christianity remains the great evil. It is only a matter of time until a spiritual leader will be born, or maybe already is. This person might already be here, having possibly experienced the strange war against Iraq, and will try in the near future to release the world and the Muslims of the evil conspiracy and of Christianity, using literature about the conspiracy in order to initiate a final religious war and atomic disaster. Mankind could spare itself by overcoming polarity. The ego games are still being repeated. As long as there are humans who believe that the world can be changed on the outside by power, laws, and war, the wolf in sheep's clothing will still mislead people. Each one of us can only lead himself. Only when man is able to let go of all needs for authority within himself and on the outside can he take the first step into independence, because all political and religious leaders are misleading seducers. To change the world or a person by force means separating it from the perfect foundation of life, and to create new karma. Indeed, life evens itself out. It does not need human beings to fulfill karma. To blame someone and to make someone feel guilty creates new karma. It creates a negative debt which has to be settled during the next life.
And so we see the Germans looking for identity, which the leadership of Hitler and others provide, and it's in that context that we look at the unique cycle of the Bodhisattva, or the teacher that arrives on the scene. And clearly, if we look at the Mayan, the Nahua, the Mesoamerican histories, we see the teaching of the 13 teachers of light and the 9 teachers of darkness. The cyclic interpretation of this would allow some sociologists and historians to believe that Hitler fits the mold of the great Lord of darkness or light that appears on the scene at the right time and provides, as it were, the consciousness opening to higher intelligence.
Therefore, it is a sad truth of karmic fate that one day the world will find out that the Holocaust of the Jewish people was indirectly financed by their own lodges. During the Third Reich, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Schacht, organized the funding of armaments and Hitler's rise to power, not only through the German industries, but to a great extent through secret money transactions from Swiss bank accounts. Illuminati and wealthy Jewish capitalists raised $120 million to bring Hitler into power. Thus, Hitler's revolution against the dark forces on the outside represents a dictatorship, his battle against his own inner darkness. The dark side of power within us and the world receives strength only when one gives it an existence in consciousness by evaluating and rejecting it. Consequently, transformation can only take place within a person and never on the outside. The exterior world only changes when changes occur on the inside.
I'd like to use as a reference point, though, the Mayan calendar and the Mayan prophecy. And in the Mayan prophecy and the calendar, we have 13 heavens, which of course are controlled by the 13 lords of light. And each one of those heavens lasts 52 years. If you take the 13 heavens and multiply that by 52, you end up with 676 years of ruling by the lords of light. Shortly after they cease, then of course in comes the lords of darkness, and each one of those two are 52 years duration, but there are only 9 of them as opposed to the 13 lords of light. So we can see that light still prevails. Nevertheless, they were very necessary to stimulate growth within the human race and here upon the planet. And each one of these lords of darkness played a personified and a, you might say, a strict application for the growth of mankind. Now, if you go back in history, and if you were to trace it back 468 years, and of course take each one of the 52 increments of the 468 years, you will find out that something great and stupendous happened during that time. Now, the last great Lord of Darkness was none other than one we knew as Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a divine instrument. Adolf Hitler played his role well. He wore the dark hat as opposed to the white hat. If we were to relate this to the Indians, and I've worked with the Indians for 22 years, they have a very simplified understanding of these things. For instance, they have a Lord of Light called, for instance, Quetzalcoatl. And then they have a Lord of Darkness called Pakal. Now, in their mythology and in their understanding of the Lords of Light and the Lords of Darkness, these two are brothers. They are twins, in fact, and they love one another very much, but they play separate roles. As the Lord of Light, Quetzalcoatl, ends his reign, of course, he turns to his brother and he says, well, now I've taught them all I can. I want you to go in there and test them and see how well they've learned what I have taught them. Well, in comes the Lord of Darkness, and in this case, we're talking about Hitler, to see how well we had learned in the past from the Lords of Light. As we know, Hitler was a metaphysician supreme. As he was a boy, he studied studiously for many, many years what we know today as esoteric or metaphysical things. He also, in addition to the many understandings he had of Viril and many other powers which were, of course, used by the ancients, he had a morbid fascination with the spear of destiny. And that was, of course, the Longinus spear that pierced the side of Christ. Hitler knew that anybody, whether it be the Lords of Darkness or the Lords of Light, should they have that spear, they were almost certain to win the war. Now, he wanted that spear for so long, and there was one in a man by the name of Rudolf Steiner, who lived here in Germany also, and he and Hitler both had a morbid fascination for that spear of destiny. Later, we know that Rudolf had to flee for his life because Hitler felt that he would get the spear and he wouldn't have it. So when we talk about Hitler, we're talking about, in my understanding, a divine being. I can remember 3 years ago in Frankfurt when I said before a large audience that Hitler was a divine being, when of course I thought they were going to stone me. But I let that sink in, and finally I said he was the last Lord of Darkness, and after I had explained it to them, then of course they accepted it.
Therefore, every exterior revolution is already doomed in advance, because the masters of revolution themselves will later become the dictators of this world. The worst that can happen is the rule of a spiritual leader who is striving to gain world power, but who only understands half the truth and has not yet surrendered his ego to divine guidance. that moment, an occult superego will be born, where only one individual visualizes him or herself as God superior, and all others are again inferior beings.